have a theory and you're coming to a crime scene, bro, if you're coming to a crime scene and I have a theory based off of the evidence I have, and you have no evidence to the contrary whatsoever, you're just saying, it didn't happen, that's weak, man. You should be fired on the spot.
I'm not making an active assertion, and I'm not, like, there's no burden of proof, because I'm not asserting that anything's false or anything. What I'm simply asking is why you believe and how you believe. Because, like, again, back to the whole code thing, we've seen, like, the idea of a code.
The Branch Davidians. Absolutely.
Like, quick question. Do you think there's, like, a possibility that what's written in the Bible is not true? Like,
anything's possible. He's a dream. Possible. Anything's possible.
Then outside of the Bible, what is the evidence for us to believe that it's true? Like, everything in it is true. Not anything in the Bible. Outside the Bible, what is there for us to believe that it is true?
First point, I don't assume that every page of any book is all true. Rather, I put together some tests to determine historical credibility, accuracy of manuscript transmission, accuracy of translation.
So, like, the idea that, like, God created everything, that on the first 7 days and such. How do you verify something? Because
it's impossible to verify that.
Because the Bible told you, correct?
No.
Then why do you believe it?
In Genesis chapter 1, verse 5, the word day, which in Hebrew is yom, refers to a 12-hour period.
I'm not talking about the nuances, but the idea that God created everything, that God created this world, that God exists at all.
Yeah.
You get that from the Bible.
No, sir, I do not. I do not believe that God exists because a book tells me so.
Yeah.
I believe God exists because I observe order and design. And I know that order and design does not come about by chance, because I would have flunked out of Yale.
Okay, then
all right?
How do you
I was not smart enough to go through here, okay? Why? Because I was not able to bring order and design out of the chaos of what was up here.
But how do you know that?
You think there's a God or not?
I think there's some sort of higher power.
Okay. The evidence is that the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are historically reliable.
Aren't those in the Bible?
Yeah?
Okay, I'm talking like outside of the Bible.
Okay, what do you want to know?
Especially on the higher aspects of the Bible, the idea of a higher power and attributing that to the God of the Bible. How do you know that's true? Why do you believe
I was answering your question directly.
Okay.
All right, so you got to slow down.
Okay.
Okay? The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John give us an accurate historical picture of Jesus.
Yeah.
Based on that historical evidence of the trustworthiness of Jesus Christ, I take a step of faith and begin a relationship with Christ. When I experience His trustworthiness in my life personally, I view His statements about the credibility of the Old Testament and His own words as being reliable. So if you die and rise from the dead, I'll listen very carefully to everything you have to say. Does that make sense? That's why I trust Jesus. Does that make sense?
So you trust in the Old Testament because Jesus told you?
No, He didn't tell me to.
Because
Jesus never talked to me personally, okay?
But Jesus vouched for the
Jesus, exactly. Jesus treated the Old Testament as the Word of God.
And you believe in however many years between now and back then that there was no room for error or inaccuracies in the Bible and other historical texts at all.
Well, of course there have been errors.
So there's mistakes in the Bible. There's inaccuracies in the Bible.
Yeah.
So then how do you know what's true and what's not? How can you...
Because the overwhelming evidence, if you study the issue, is those variations in the original manuscripts in Greek are so small, they don't change anything. It's a question of personal article, impersonal article, singular, plural, repetition of a phrase. Jesus was the son of Mary, who was a virgin in Matthew chapter 1. The discrepancies, the variations in the Greek New Testament are so small, they don't change nothing.
I'm not even talking about fully discrepancies, but the idea that the Bible was written by humans, right? The Bible was written by humans.
I sure hope it was.
Then how do you know those humans were telling the truth? Our entire faith system is based on trust of humans from thousands of years ago. And if they're lying, they're crazy, as you guys are saying, then everything we know crumbles. And the possibility of that exists no matter what.
Yes, that's right. What are your tests that you use to determine historical reliability of any book?
It's as we were talking about before, like the verification of other sources.
Okay, so there are plenty of other documents about Jesus.
Yeah.
Josephus,
Yeah, I'm not talking
Antiquities.
about the existence of Jesus.
Well, then what are you talking about?
I was talking about God as a higher power.
No, sir. Now you're not being fair with me. Now you're being dishonest. I told you flat out, there's no way that a thinking person can believe in God because a book tells you so.
Okay, that's why, and I'm sorry.
Well, then you went right back to that. Come on, sir. Are we going to talk right or not?
Yeah.
No, we're not. If you're going to come on.
I feel like we're talking.
You're running circles, and that's not fair. We agreed earlier.
Yeah.
I do not believe God exists because a book, the Bible, tells me so.
You believe it because the book told you to believe that Jesus.
No. And I'm going to have to go on to somebody else real soon if we don't start communicating better.
Okay.
Fair enough?
Yeah.
Okay. I believe God exists because the evidence of order and design in creation points to an intelligent mind.
Yeah.
I believe God exists because I experience moral absolutes, which points to a moral lawgiver.
Yeah.
I believe God exists because the evidence is life comes from life, not from non-life.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's more plausible and reasonable for me to believe, in the beginning, a living being created life, not in the beginning, non-life created life. That's why I believe God exists. Has nothing to do with any book. It has to do with an observation of life.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why I believe God exists. Now, why do I believe the Gospels are historically accurate? Because I have tests that I use to determine whether any document that claims to be historical is reliable. My tests are 4: internal consistency, literary style, archaeological evidence, and manuscript evidence. And the Gospels pass that with flying colors, as does the Quran. If you're going to tell me Muhammad never lived, I'm going to tell you you're wrong. Muhammad was a real historical person.
Yeah.
All right, now are we clear or are we unclear?
Okay. One last question. I'm trying to understand your logic genuinely. So you believe, like, because of historical verification and other sources and internal accuracy and such, that the Gospels are true.
Are historically accurate. That's all. Let's say it all together. Historically accurate. Hey! Some people can listen around here. It's good to see here.
Okay, then, so from the teachings of the Gospels and the teaching of the Gospels spreading the word of Jesus,
Yeah?
that word of Jesus that gives you a faith in the teachings of the Old Testament. Yes or no?
No. My experience of the trustworthiness of Christ in my life.
In your life.
In my life.
So it's not the Bible, it's your life. No, now we're changing the story.
I got him. Let me in. Let me in, coach.
All right. Your turn. Oh, man.
Here we go, baby. You might get me, but I'm going to try. All right, so within the first 100 years after Jesus' life,
Yeah.
25 extra biblical sources we have from Josephus, the Talmud, many others, talking about the whole narrative of the Christian faith. So throw out the Bible, throw out the documents, throw out Christianity. It was all eyewitness testimony from those outside of the Bible, and then these eyewitnesses to the resurrection
Eyewitness
itself.
testimonies could be false.
They can be false. All of history can be false. I'm totally with you. Alexander the Great, everybody could just be false. So why even come and have a history department here?
Yeah.
It all could be false.
That's not the argument I'm making. I'm just saying that, like,
You just said that, though.
okay.
That is the argument you're making. See, you keep, what I hear you keep doing is you keep saying, this is the argument I'm making, but no, as soon as we give you an answer, no, that's not the argument I'm making. That's exactly what I'm hearing every single time. It's being redundant. So what's the argument? Because he just said, the reason why we listen and we think about the Old Testament and work through what is true, metaphorical, literal, what is not, is by looking at Jesus Christ.
My
Yeah.
assertion right now
Yeah.
is not even an active assertion of, yes, the Bible is false, it's all false, because I want to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the idea that me and myself personally, like, I can't reconcile the idea, like, the possibility that, like, all these testimonies, all these eyewitness testimonies, everyone believing in Jesus, that could have been a giant cult back then.
It could have been.
And that everyone was just crazy and believing in that cult.
Could have been.
And
then all of a sudden the early church was built off of this cult that claimed to be overnight believing that a God became human, died, rose from the dead. Then all of a sudden all these Jews who never would have believed in a God who would have actually died on a cross and rose from the dead, they would have been the last ones to believe that. All of a sudden overnight, 2/3 of the Roman Empire became Christian. What's the hoax? What's the hoax? What happened? No. See, if you're going to deny this, you need to tell me, or maybe tonight, come up with it yourself. You need to tell me then what occurred. What occurred? It wasn't the resurrection. So what occurred?
again,
If you don't have a theory and you're coming to a crime scene, bro, if you're coming to a crime scene and I have a theory based off of the evidence I have, and you have no evidence to the contrary whatsoever, you're just saying, it didn't happen, that's weak, man. You should be fired on the spot.
I'm not making an active assertion, and I'm not, like, there's no burden of proof because I'm not asserting that anything's false or anything. What I'm simply asking is why you believe and how you believe. Because, like, again, back to the whole cult thing, we've seen, like, the idea of a cult.
The Branch Davidians. Absolutely.
Like, seen people,
Jim Jones. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And again, I'm not asserting, yes, this has to be false.
Right.
I'm more asking as someone who wants to believe how I can truly believe with all faith and no doubt.
Absolutely. And so you have to go to Jesus Christ yourself by reading the Gospels, figure out, did he exist? So 98.9% of scholars believe that he existed, right? So we're there with that. Secondly, was his character pure, perfect? If he claimed to be God, we expect some pretty good character, right? What about his sayings? He said these things that were of authority, which meant they transcended even the law at the time that the rabbis were talking about. So his teachings must have been pretty stinking good. Now, what about the resurrection? Well, all scholars, even the most atheistic, will say that there was an empty tomb. That tomb was Joseph of Arimathea's, that the disciples claimed to have had some experience with Jesus, who at first they thought it definitely was not Jesus, but then all of a sudden they claimed to have had experiences that it was, that there was tremendous life change with the top rabbi in the known world at the time, which was Saul. The life change turned to Paul because he had an encounter with the resurrected Christ. And then the church began. And then all of a sudden, 34% of the world became Christian. Now, it could have been, Jesus Christ could have been, like you're saying beautifully, Jim Jones, or he could have been David Koresh, who had these two huge cults. So he claimed to be God. As a mental health therapist, I see a lot of people who claim to be God who are schizophrenics. Many. So Jesus Christ could have been a schizophrenic who pulled off this incredible hoax, and now 34% of the world think he's the Son of God. Could be the case. Could be crazy. Could be the case.
Yeah. So, okay.
What is more likely? That he actually was a son of God, or that he pulled off this incredible hoax that has changed the world and changed the entire known Roman Empire? And by the way, if you're here at the school searching for a higher level education, you do realize it was all Christian missionaries who started this school, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, right? So the search for truth was fully Christian.
Yeah.
So, do you sacrifice for others, do you think, at times? Yeah. Are you kind to others? Are you compassionate to others?
So.
Okay, you are a Christian even if you say you're not a Christian, according to Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yeah.
So be a little more consistent and don't be a Christian in your lifestyle if you're going to be an atheist. Don't live that way, right?
Yeah.
What do you think on that?
Okay, like, one big thing, I guess, what it's boiled down, at least in my mind, is the idea that, like, your faith and your belief in Jesus comes from, like, through these facts, through these texts, an understanding and a trust that these human documents were indeed correct, and that from these things that happened, you believe that it's implied that there was a Jesus, so there was a God, so there's all this. And I guess we kind of agree to disagree, because I don't know if we'd ever come to that reconciliation, is that, like, I think there's too much room for too much room for error, too much room for change, too much room for things to be false.
Good.
That I can't stake my entire life and my entire belief and my entire system on.
Yeah.
So, like.
So can I reinforce your point even more?
Yeah.
400,000 variants in the Bible.
Yeah.
Why do I shouldn't believe the Bible? It's 400,000 variants. Okay, well, 6,000 manuscripts though.
Yeah.
So there's endless more words and theological doctrine, obviously, than any type of variants. And these variants are missing commas, for example, that a scribe missed. So do I have a problem with that? No, I don't. Because I'm not of a certain religion or ilk that says this Bible is directly from the Word of God with zero error. No, God used humans, obviously, to communicate his message. But I think what ultimately gets to that question, I hope this is a sufficient answer, maybe it's not, is within the first 100 years after Jesus' resurrection, the eyewitnesses, many who we're still alive according to the earliest creed, 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8. Paul talks about this. These creeds were passed all around the known world. So everybody had the central message of what occurred with Jesus' resurrection. And that's how the early church happened, so it wasn't a hoax, and it spread so quickly. Now you have to get into, okay, but is everybody just lying? Was it the wrong tomb? Well, hold on, there was enemy attestation coming from the Romans that actually this did occur, but they say that the disciples actually stole the body. And so never do we have any extra biblical, outside of the Bible, documents saying that the resurrection did not occur. Everybody took it at face value, they just didn't want to talk about it. So within the first 100 years, just remember this, it was oral eyewitness testimony that spread around the entire Roman Empire that central thing happened, the resurrection.
Yeah.
So it wasn't misinterpreted. It didn't come till later, hundreds of years later, where all of a sudden heresies broke out. It said, oh, but was he fully human? Oh, but was he fully God? I don't get it, huh? What about the Trinity? But early on, we still have all the evidence in the world that was the message based off of the evidence.
Okay, one last question.
Yes.
So, like, oh wait, I forgot my question. Oh yeah. So, considering agreeing on this hypothetical truth of the resurrection, I understand that, but I don't understand how, you agree that God's messengers are humans, right?
Uh-huh.
And humans can make mistakes.
Uh-huh.
So I don't understand how that trust in maybe that historical event leads to your trust in everything else in the Bible that's being said, and no acknowledgement of the fact that maybe this teaching was wrong, maybe this scripture was wrong, maybe this was mistranslated, maybe this was misaccurate. And for someone to base their journey to heaven on an unreliable document that could have mistakes, and to believe that a perfect being had this document to give us their message, and it has mistakes, it has inaccuracies, but it's supposed to eternally teach us, I can't reconcile.
Throw it out.
The Bible?
Throw it out.
Throw it out.
Throw it out.
Okay, what do we do?
still have everything that happened. Throw it out.
But now how do I know how
Everything that happened outside of the Bible, we have all the documents that I just mentioned, all the sources,
No, but then
that this is what occurred from enemy attestation. People who didn't want the Bible to be true, the events in it to be true,
Yeah, I'm not talking
were
about the
claiming that
events.
this occurred.
I'm not talking about the events. I'm talking about how do I know how to live my life now if we're throwing out the Bible? So
Well, sure, the ethical teachings that were passed down orally and eventually written down, sure, you want to live off those ethical teachings. Now, you could say because of the character of the people who actually wrote them, because of the character of Christ. Well, yeah, you certainly don't know him. But wait a second, hold on. I just said you are living like a Christian based off of all your values and ethics. That came directly from the Judeo-Christian faith that founded this very university. So if you're doubting all of it, and saying, no, it's wrong, it's not true, then why not live more selfishly? Why not cheat on your exams if you can get away with it? That's from an evolutionary perspective, just get away with it.
There's many Christian values that I don't believe in, I don't live by.
Okay, what are some of those?
Premarital sex.
Premarital sex. So this is why you're not a Christian. You said 5 times out here, guys, I just want to make sure we all heard this. I want to be a Christian, but then all of a sudden we get to the very bottom of it, and it's an emotional bias. It's your faith based off the frustration on premarital sex. And I'm with you, bro. I don't want to be a Christian either, because of the emotional bias of I want to sleep with as many women as possible.
That's not what I said.
That's exactly, I promise you that is what is driving you. I promise you that's what's driving you, at least a huge part of it.
Okay, so,
All right, that was your last question, right? Because we're going to have to move on.
I got a really good follow-up question.
Oh, it better be really good. If it's not good, we got to out.
Really good. Okay. We could really, I really just want to hear your thoughts.
Get the gotcha moment, yep.
Okay. So, again, throw the Bible out, but we're trusting the ethics and teachings of Christianity because of the character of these figures. But if you just said we could throw the Bible out and that it's about the historical variability and the Bible is flawed, why are we believing in every single thing the Bible is saying and every single teaching it has if you yourself just said that, you can't fully trust it?
There are endless amounts of things in the Old Testament that are descriptive and not prescriptive in the New Testament because they are not repeated. So we're not, I'm going to play football this afternoon, possibly with my daughter. I'm going to throw the pigskin. Well, it says in the Old Testament, don't touch pigskin.
Yeah.
So am I breaking a law?
No.
But it says it in the Bible, according to you. It says in the Bible, I am breaking a law.
I don't know. It seems like it's not. I don't know. It seems like you're leading me to saying it's not breaking law.
I'm not leading it. It says it.
Okay, so it is breaking law.
According to you,
According to the Bible, yes.
According to you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, what did I just say? That's in the Old Covenant. That's descriptive at the time for the Israelite nation.
So
now in the New Covenant, it's not prescriptive because it's not repeated, and Jesus came to fulfill that law.
So we're just interpreting the Bible.
So just remember, yes, you interpret every single thing that you read, I promise. Everybody here interprets.
So there's room for
If you don't interpret, you are lying to yourself and to me right now. I promise you interpret.
There's room for subjectivity.
There is room for subjectivity, but I hope you are honest with context, authorship,
Yeah.
readership, time period. I really hope you look into these things and not just say, I'm going to go to the Bible. You know, Jesus was the door, so here's a couple pieces of plywood just slapped together. So, you know, he's a door, but that's my subjective opinion. That's my interpretation. He was just a physical piece of plywood. I hope you're not going to honestly go and say, you're just cherry picking and saying that.
So
hey, you're going to read it honestly.
It's our interpretation
Yep.
of the writings in a flawed manuscript from flawed people that is our surefire way to reach heaven. There's a lot of inconsistencies there.
Well, then all of your classical literature is completely flawed, and you shouldn't trust any of it because it was the monks who passed it down.
I mean, we critically
They
analyze
took
all our...
the monks who passed it. That's what we're talking about here. Critically analyze it.
Yeah.
But the central tenets of everything in the Gospels, I promise you, my friend, have been reliably passed down, starting through oral testimony. The eyewitnesses themselves, they started to die off. The monks started to perfectly write it out, other than these variants where the commas, some of the periods are missing. I got to study Hebrew. It was very difficult when I was getting my master's, trust me, and yet incredible the consistency across manuscripts when you look at Hebrew in the Old Testament and then Greek in the New. I had to take that too. I got a D+ on that.
Yeah, but again, I'm not talking about accuracy of manuscripts. We were talking about ethics.
Yes.
And the ethics of the Bible.
Yes.
And
this is why you don't believe. Because you don't like the ethic of no premarital sex. That's why you don't believe.
Yeah,
I promise, you're a handsome guy. I can tell by your personality. The main reason you don't believe is because you want to sleep around, just like the majority of professors that I know who are honest about it. The sooner you are honest with yourself, I promise, the more unbiased you will come to interpreting the Bible.
Oh, that was my last question.
Great questions today, man.
Thank you.
Love it. Absolutely. Good job.
I was watching one of your earlier videos on YouTube where you said that you don't have to be born Christian or raised Christian to turn towards God. You can see God and find Him in your own life.
Yes, sir.
And form a relationship with Him.
Correct.
And that hell is the absence of a relationship with God.
Yep.
Now, in modern times, there are some governments, namely North Korea,
Yeah.
that not only prevent the spread of gospel,
Right.
but they prevent the spread of all information outside of their country.
Yeah.
And so all those people born and raised in that country are taught to worship their leader, and they're prevented from ever meeting Jesus or having a relationship with Him.
Yeah.
So what does God say to those people when they pass away? Does He want to form a relationship with them, and how can they get to heaven?
How did Jesus treat people?
He treated them with respect and kindness.
So we have all the evidence in the world. You go right to Romans 1 and 2 about, you could take, philosophically, you could take what Paul's saying there is basically the teleological argument, which is all the beauty, all the art, all the immaterial things, which I was trying to challenge this guy on, from a materialistic secular perspective, you cannot get, but all the immaterial things lead us outside ourselves to, there's a God. Paul also says moral objectivity. What is in your conscience, right and wrong? So God knows ultimately what that person's going to choose, but He doesn't determine them to choose one or the other because He's outside of space and time. So He knows what their choice will be, but they still have free will to make the decision. But you're right, if they aren't exposed to a Bible, and they're probably not going to get a Bible, well then they're not going to have the same type of exposure that we have, and they're going to be judged differently. That's why we have examples of being judged differently in the Bible, or people coming to know Christ differently.
Those not exposed to Christ are judged differently. They get a little bit maybe more leniency down the line because they haven't had the exposure, they didn't have the chance. And you're also talking about objective morality in that the sort of the claim of there's a certain set of rules you live by. You respect the people who are around you. You respect your neighbors. You're kind to people. You feed the hungry.
Yeah.
This sort of objective claim of morality. What is your perspective on, say, an atheist or an agnostic who may, let's say, even fully by coincidence, but end up following the rules governed by objective morality, or the moral things to do as governed by objective morality,
Yeah.
but just plainly does not believe Jesus is the Messiah, believe in
You bet.
Jesus
Real
as
quick,
the
so
Son
we
of
gotta
God.
leave.
Yeah.
In a few minutes.
There is nothing out of your own performance or merit that can get you to God. So it does not matter if an atheist buys into Christian ethics and morality, Hindu ethics and morality, or humanist ethics and morality. It really doesn't matter whatsoever, because it's not about your own good works that get you to heaven. It's about understanding who Jesus is, what he did for you, and growing in a trusting relationship with him.
Let's say, hypothetically, there's someone who bumped into the Bible one time, sort of brushed through it and then kind of put it down, or sort of was informed by it in some ways, but then kind of put it down. There's this, do you see it as sort of a binary thing of you have people who are not exposed to Jesus and therefore get judged differently? Or is it a spectrum of people who have maybe been exposed in different to different magnitudes? And does God, as you see it,
I would check out, great question, I would check out Acts chapter 10. The wealthy businesswoman Lydia is attracted eventually and believes in Christ based off of more of an intellectual approach in reading the scriptures.
Okay.
The centurion is based off of actually more of a miracle. God brings about an earthquake. And so he needs this miracle because he's this hardened intellectual blue-collar guy who is, I'm not going to believe any evidence. But the experience of a miracle opens him up. Then the slave girl, it's an emotional connection where there's social justice involved, that actually Christians come and they pull her out and away from the slavery that she was in, and she feels that liberty and the freedom of it, and now she actually has a conversion to Christ. So just in that one chapter in all of Scripture, you have 3 different case studies of how people come to know Christ differently.
So is the lesson that given a single exposure, you have a path to God? Is that the takeaway?
Yeah, we all get different types of exposures. Descartes was exactly right about the starry skies above and the conscience within. As a Christian, he said that's how God reveals himself, especially to those who have not heard of Jesus Christ.
What of people born in different circumstances where presumably, and everyone comes to God, who comes to God in their own way, but presumably you have individuals who may come from a very Catholic Christian family. The wheels are kind of greased a little bit on that one. But let's say you come from, you see someone from the Hasidic community or a devout Islamic community, who again happen to practice this moral objectivism, who feed the hungry, who are good to their neighbor.
All right, you're buying right back into it, though. You're buying right back into it. Who did Jesus Christ attack more than any other group when he lived here?
But so God,
the Pharisees, who were all about every jot and tittle of the law. They were giving a lot away. They were definitely careful with their tongue. So it's not about working to God.
Any single exposure to the scripture, then sort of gets your name moved off the Excel spreadsheet where it's like, okay, we're going to use these rules to judge this guy, and he gets moved on to the naughty list. Maybe not the naughty list, maybe that's a simplistic way to put it, but moved on to the this person had a chance and they missed it list. Like there's no spectrum to how God
everything
looks at people who have interacted with Scripture.
No. Everything in the Gospels and Paul's epistles, shows, even at the end, after 40 days between the resurrection and the ascension of Jesus Christ, he gave endless amounts of proofs, we read, and evidence for those who did not believe. Even his own disciples, many of them, at the end, were doubting, and some turned away from the faith, who had all this evidence. So people harden their hearts. And many say, nope, here's the evidence, and I actually believe I want to turn over my heart. But it's typically a heart issue. It's not about, oh, did I get enough evidence all of a sudden? And did I get this book?
So there's no curve
beyond
that people
that.
are graded on.
Right.
There's no curve.
God judges us according to our heart.
Like I get everything I need from philosophy, from existentialism specifically, in order to live a happy and meaningful life. So personally, I feel satisfied in basically every way, shape, and form how I'm living my life. And so I don't know why I would go out and seek out another meaning for life.
How are you so happy as an atheist? You have no objective meaning and purpose. You have no objective morals for really knowing right from wrong. All of your family members are going to pass away, and your friends, in a short life, which will be very painful for many of them, and you will never see them again ever. They're going through a trap door to non-existence. With all of that in mind, how do you live such a happy existence other than one where you're denying these facts?
If there's no meaning in life, if there's no path I specifically have to follow, then I can choose my own path. And that path that I choose is the ultimate meaning, because it's what I chose and I'm living authentically to myself.
What does authentically mean?
Authentically means I'm not accepting another worldview that was pushed on me, but I have my own worldview and living that way.
I have my own worldview. Nobody pushed a worldview onto me. I have my own worldview as an atheist, and I'm the free thinker. That is ridiculous, because you came directly from Hume, directly from 200 years ago. The reason why you're an atheist is because you are a white male pushed on you by highly enlightened thinking to be a free thinker. You are a construct of your time, of your race, of your gender, studying philosophy at this fine school. In no way are you somehow more enlightened as a free thinker than somebody who has been pushed a worldview upon. You have a worldview, my friend. I'm sorry. Atheists try and get out of this. It's like one big celebrity atheist we were debating not too long ago. Originally it was evidence for God. That's the debate. But then he changed it to strong evidence for God. And he just kept moving the goalposts. He said, you know what? Nope. I want it bigger. I want more evidence, more evidence, more evidence. Then I'll come to know God. Endless amounts of evidence. It's like Richard Dawkins. Originally he wanted God to write his name in the stars. But then he said, no, that wasn't enough. He wanted God specifically to speak to him. But then he said, you know what? I could be hallucinating. That's not enough. And he just kept moving the goalposts. Hyper-skepticism. Don't be that way. Understand that you are influenced just as much as anybody here who has a specific worldview.
I am a product of my environment, and the reason why I'm an atheist is because my parents were atheistic and they pushed that worldview on me. But then I accepted that worldview and I found happiness in that worldview because, again, I was able to create my own meaning, and I enjoyed that. Just like if someone else is a Christian and it's because their parents were Christian and because of that they studied Christianity and became a Christian and were very satisfied with that view, then they're living authentically as well. But if someone is unsatisfied with Christianity and still lives as a Christian, then that's inauthentic. If someone is unsatisfied as an atheist and they still live as an atheist, then that's inauthentic. So I'm just someone who wants...
It has nothing to do with satisfaction. I think satisfaction can be part of it, but no, never accept a worldview or a religion or an anti-religion based off of it makes me happy. I'm sorry, that does not align yourself with being a truth seeker. Sorry, it doesn't. It just aligns you with being comfortable. If you're going to say that you're an honest truth seeker, you're not just going to say, well, because atheism makes me comfortable.
So why are you an atheist?
Well, I feel like how he said, I am a product of my environment to a degree, but at the end of the day, to a degree, at the end of the day, I do choose to still be an atheist. Every day I wake up, I still say, I'm satisfied that this world is cold and meaningless, and I get to choose my own meaning, and I get to be fully satisfied in my choice being the ultimate meaning for me.
Okay. So how can you say you're totally satisfied? I mean, I'm creating this illusion that my life has this meaning, that if I choose to the opposite for tomorrow, that's just as true, it's just as real.
Well, I feel fully satisfied because I think that everyone ultimately picks some, as I said, I believe that the world is meaningless and that there ultimately are no true religions. But I think everyone does choose some meaning that they ascribe to their life. And I think that if I were to switch up my meaning tomorrow, then I wouldn't be living authentically myself. But if my meanings gradually change as I learn more, then that would be authentic to myself. And so it's true that it's my meaning because I chose it was my meaning and I could change that meaning.
Right.
But that still doesn't mean I chose it because of my own choice. And that's essentially all that matters. As long as I'm choosing out of my own decision what my meaning of life is, then I feel satisfied with that.
Okay. If there is nothing more to reality than matter and energy, are you sure you've got a free will?
No.
Thank you. So when you talk about my own choice, what are you really talking about?
My own illusion of choice, I would say.
Boy, you're a delight to talk to. You're consistent. It's your own illusion of choice that you're referring to when you say, I choose. Because if there is no God, reality is matter and energy evolved to a higher order, which means there's no me, there's a complex chemical reaction, But there's no free will where I make a choice. I just live out the chemical reactions in my brain. We agree?
Yes.
Okay, good. Here's why I can't accept that worldview. Because I experience free will.
Yeah.
Not only that, I observe free will. I observe a mom and a dad who got 4 precious little kids, and at some point, those 4 precious little kids are going to tell mom and dad where they can step off. All right? It's going to happen. Hate to tell you, mom and dad, but we got 3 kids and 6 grandkids, and they've told us where we can step off plenty of times. So this whole idea that we don't have free will, oh no, sir, we do. In fact, I'm so committed to free will that I support the legal system in this country, which tells me, Cliff, if you take up a bunch of big books and hit this man over the head with them, we're going to haul you into court. And if I say to the judge, Your Honor, this man just so reminded me of my father. My father had the same type of receding hairline. He had the same type of build. That when I saw this guy, he just so reminded me of my abusive father, I had to hit him. Fortunately, we live in a culture, a society that says, no, I'm sorry, Cliff, I'm sorry that you had that abusive father, but when you hit him, you are responsible. And to blame your abusive father for hitting him, sorry, I'm real grateful for that. Aren't you?
Yeah, I think that free will is important. I also have a minor in crime and justice, so I know
Good.
that speaking in terms of criminology, there has to be some kind of free will. I personally still think it's an illusion in the sense that our experience, our day-to-day experience, you kind of need something like free will in order to understand it. However, criminology is about looking at someone's upbringing, it's about looking at someone's past traumas, it's trying to scratch at that deterministic underlying foundation by saying if we can know more about it, we can get close to predicting the future.
Okay. So we make a distinction between a chemical imbalance in the brain that leads to insanity versus me being sane and choosing to murder him. We make a distinction, don't we? Okay. So if you're normal, if you're healthy, you are responsible for the way you treat each other. And I got grossed out at the University of Arizona when a student raised his hand and said, "Hey, I date rape." And I said, "Really? And why do you date rape?" And he said, "Because I have a very high testosterone level." That's a con job. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd agree with virtually everything you said, except just the difference is that I feel like I have a free will rather than I have a free will, which I do think that's still, as I said, our day-to-day experiences, since we don't know every single causal chain that happened since the beginning of the Big Bang, and we can't access that knowledge and predict every single event that's going to happen afterwards. We might as well accept that since we don't know everything, since we're not omniscient, there's this thing called free will that is present basically due to a lack of knowledge. If you knew that person's high testosterone, if you knew everything about every single neurochemical that was firing in that person's brain at that very moment and every single moment in his life before that moment, then you could predict exactly why and when he date raped. But we don't know that, so we have to put some of the responsibility on him.
So when she says to you, "I love you," you know exactly what she means, right? You don't understand the complexity of it, but you know very, very well that she doesn't love you. Instead, there's a chemical instinct inside of her that...
That's all there is to every feeling. So everything's on that same level playing field. If love is just a chemical, in our brains, well, everything is a chemical in our brains. Perception is just a chemical in our brains. Hate is just a chemical in our brains.
Yeah.
So to say that love is just a chemical in our brains doesn't actually make it any lesser than anything else.
But my experience of life is, I might not want to forgive him. I might want to hate his guts for the way he hurt me, but I'm going to choose to forgive him. Instead of everything in my mind is going, Rocky, 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 blast this dude into the next generation for what he did to me. Instead, I'm going to choose to forgive him. I'm sorry, sir. That's my experience of reality, and you ain't going to convince me your experience is any different. I think you're playing a game. And you're consistent intellectually, and I respect that, and I thank you for being so consistent. But I don't think you can live that out. I don't think you're going to say to the girl who says, I love you, yeah, the chemicals are just firing in the right way for my benefit. I think you're going to know, whoa, she's choosing to love me. I'm excited. I'm ecstatic. She's choosing to love me. Wow. You know something? If you tell me this dad and this mom have to care for these 4 precious kids, I'm going to tell you, you've never met a deadbeat dad and a deadbeat mom. Because when you meet a deadbeat dad and a deadbeat mom, you know that these two don't have to care for these precious children. They choose to care for them. They choose to sacrifice for them. And that's one of the reasons I respect them. And the reason I don't respect a deadbeat dad is because he doesn't have to ignore his children. He chooses to ignore his children. That's why I'm going to hold him responsible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so Jesus Christ bleeds and dies on a cross, claiming to do that for our making irresponsible decisions, sin. He's buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. 3 days later, he rises from the dead, and over a period of 40 days, he appears to over 500 people who see him risen from the dead. He says, if you want to be tied to God and have eternal life, believe in me. Do you think you might believe in him one day?
No.
Okay, why?
Well, again, I feel like I'm still fulfilled and satisfied with my current belief. And I also feel like, I do feel like just the idea that there's 2.6 billion Christians on this world and there's 8 billion people on this world, I think, like, why should I value Christianity much more than Islam or much more than Hinduism?
You shouldn't. You're right. But Jesus Christ, he's different. He was dead and he rose from the dead. That resurrection makes the dude weird, really weird. And by gollies, if he really did rise from the dead, we better put our faith in him, hadn't we?
I don't think he rose from the dead.
But if you find out that he did rise from the dead, you'd be open to putting your faith in him, maybe.
Yes.
All righty. Now just please read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You're going to be critical about them, and I don't blame you. I hope you are. I hope you're not going to blindly believe. So you're going to come up with some tests that you use to determine historical reliability. Use those tests on Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and if the evidence is that you can trust them historically, then just read the Gospels as history, not as the Word of God. Just read them as history, and ask yourself, does the historical evidence of his life, teachings, death, and resurrection point to his reliability, or does it not? And if you find the historical evidence is he is reliable, make your own decision to trust in him. Not blindly, but based on his lifestyle, teachings, death, and resurrection.
Authentically, yeah.
Bingo, authentically, exactly. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and I mean, I do think that if God was to come down right now and show me that he existed, then I would convert. If I could have some kind of evidence, then I feel like that's why a determinist who's an atheist is because the evidence that I feel like I've seen, while I haven't read the Bible, I've done a fair bit of philosophy of religion and theology research, but you're right, I haven't read the Gospels and then gone, okay, I'm not going to believe that.
Right.
But I do feel like I would need that evidence, that historical evidence that someone did break every single law of science and resurrect from the dead.
Ooh, okay, good. Okay, I'm going to let Stuart go pretty soon, talk with you, but you're a delight, first of all, thank you, all right? And I mean that, thank you for talking with us. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick shot at that idea. Okay, God, if you exist, bingo, right now, I want to hear the voice from up there, and I got to audibly hear it. Okay, that's a dangerous game. That's very similar to the guy who looks into the face of the girl who says, I love you, and says, oh yeah, prove it, have sex with me. And if you don't have sex with me, you don't really love me. You see, we can't demand that another person express their love for us or that they're really real by playing that type of game, of putting up those demands. You know, I've got to allow you to reveal yourself to me as you choose, not as I dictate. Well, the same with God. I can't say, hey, God, you got to meet these tests in order for me to believe in you. He's interested in your love because he loves you, which means he's a personal God, which means he's not just interested in an intellectual game where we sort of say, yeah, God exists. I believe it. No, he's interested in us trusting him. And the universe is not religiously ambiguous. There's more than enough evidence for any thinking person to believe that God exists. But God is not going to overwhelm you by slapping you up on the side of the head and saying, dummy, I'm here, believe in me. He became a human being. He lived a sinless life. He died a sacrificial death on a cross. He rose from the dead. Gosh, it's in living color. I love you. Does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, kind of another side point, but I feel like the argument that you're making is that Jesus has shown that he loves us. God has shown that he loves us.
Yeah.
But I think there's that same exact statement from many other religions, from the Buddhists, from et cetera, et cetera. So what you're saying is that because Jesus resurrected from the dead, he is above all those other religions, or at least Christianity.
He's more reliable.
More reliable, yeah.
Okay, but sir, study Buddhism. It's impossible in Buddhism for God to love you because God is not a personal being. It takes a personal being to love. Siddhartha Gautama Buddha never once talks about God. Talks a lot about nirvana, karma. Took Siddhartha Gautama Buddha 547 rebirths to eventually attain nirvana. But there's no personal being.
So you're saying that love with a personal being is what sets apart a religion, namely that one.
Exactly.
As the true religion, or the best religion.
I'm saying if there's not a personal being, there's no love. Impossible for this thing to love me. It takes a personal being with a free will to love me. In Buddhism, no personal being, no personal God, love is impossible. Now, please don't leave, but Stuart, what do you have to say?
That's a quick question.
You've been listening well.
So you use your five senses to get to this conclusion, right? Okay, well, if an immaterial God has nothing to do with our five senses in terms of locating him, how did you use your five senses to decide that this God is not real?
Well, I would argue that to someone who has taken faith up in Christianity, they've used their five senses to not believe in the other 299 religions.
Yeah.
So I'm the same as that, except I just chose to not believe in one more.
That doesn't answer the question. That's a red herring, I think. That didn't answer it. How did you, because you said based off your five senses, how have you gotten to this certainty that God does not exist, who you cannot connect with your five senses? So philosophically, because you love philosophy, I'm going to press you on this. How have you gotten to that point?
I mean, yeah, in philosophy, for example, René Descartes talks about how all that is truly certain is I think, therefore I am. And
I think it's I choose, therefore I am, in today's day and culture.
Okay, yeah. But even that, the skeptics have criticized that because it presupposes an I that exists. I mean, you can really go level after level and doubt absolutely everything.
Yep.
So I feel like...
So I hope you doubt your doubt as well.
Yeah, you have to. So the reason why I'm not a Christian is, well, because to me, believing in things that I can use with my five senses and nothing else works just fine for my day-to-day life. So not believing in Christianity or any of the other religions doesn't actually negatively impact me, at least from my perspective, which is why I would say I'm not a Christian.
Okay, but still, I look at empirically verifiable things that are physical. But I have so many faith jumps I have to take to assume different understandings of human nature. Does that make sense? Do you agree with that? You have faith as well.
Yeah, and to a degree, science takes faith. You know, I'm taking faith on Stephen Hawking when he talks about I've never actually measured the exact things that he's measured. I've never exactly measured the same things that Charles Darwin has measured when I believe in evolution.
Yet again, immaterial.
Yeah, and
they go by proof. You're supposed to go by proof.
I disagree with that to a degree because I can't prove every single scientific principle that I do believe in. I believe in peer-reviewed studies. I take faith in peer-reviewed studies that are presented by well-respected scientists. So that does take faith to a certain degree, but believing in those things adds a certain value into my life when I take a biology class. Whereas believing in Christ doesn't necessarily add any value to my life when I'm in any of my other scientific classes. It's something, like you said, that's outside of everything else that you can believe with your five senses.
As an atheist, you have to say everything is material. So you say, I live by proof with the material. I live by it's empirically studied. As soon as you hop into, I make these faith positions about human nature being, I want to be fulfilled, I want to have satisfaction, I believe I reason, like you're reasoning right now, I believe that humans have value, I believe that I have a free will. Now you're stepping outside of what an atheist is supposed to be consistent with when it comes to their worldview. Because you're making these leaps right now that you're not supposed to be making if you're an atheist. I mean, do you reason right now? Are you reasoning? Because I said you're reasoning. Maybe I don't know. Maybe you're not reasoning. Maybe I'm not reasoning well. Are you reasoning right now?
Yeah, I would say I'm reasoning.
Why would you think you're reasoning from an atheistic perspective?
Because my neurons are firing, I'm having a discussion, I'm speaking back.
Yeah, but you came from simply a highly evolved monkey. You're going to trust the mind of a monkey when it comes to reasoning?
I didn't come from a monkey, I shared in ancestral...
Fine, you came as an accident, a total accident. So you came from the irrational, and you're telling me all of a sudden you're here as a rational human being seeking after things like truth and the immaterial.
Yeah, I think rationality comes from complexity. So at the end of the day, I am still just a bunch of atoms together.
Excellent.
Irrational atoms.
Excellent. So you're saying then, we'll go by Occam's razor, deciding the most simplistic response. You're saying to me, you just said I'm a very complex individual and rationality came from complexity.
Yes.
So are you telling me then that there's more evidence behind the complexity coming from non-complexity, which is just emptiness, a total void, and we get complexity and then our reasoning capabilities? Or is there more evidence, and is it more sensical to understand that we came from a God who created everything, who has tremendous complexity in creativity, he is omnipotent, he is omniscient, and created us as reasoning human beings who have complexity, so much complexity that a DNA strand is 6 feet long, and if you took all of our DNA strands, you could go back to the sun and back 200 times. And if there's the tiniest piece of misinformation within a single DNA strand, you would be handicapped. I mean, the chances of that are so slim, and yet, obviously, we have many handicapped people. And yet, you are developed with that type of complexity, and you're telling me that you just came from primordial soup and somehow became that complex? Just because time, supposedly. You get more time, and things get more complex. Yet again, there is zero evidence to that unless there is something guiding the process, unless there is a mechanism behind it. If there's a mechanism behind the cell, now you have the opportunity to duplicate and create things that are more complex, like your handsome body. But you have no creator, you have no mechanism, all you have is time, and supposedly with time, we go from primordial soup, nothing, and nothing created that primordial soup, by the way, to all of a sudden this level of complexity where you're studying this level of philosophy, trying to seek after truth with me. Where is there more evidence to? Would it make sense more so with the creator, who's complex, or with just nothing and you popped up out of nowhere by chance?
Well, so you're saying that we both believe in non-complexities turning into complex things over...
No, I don't believe that.
Period of time.
No, because God is outside of space and time.
Okay.
God is infinite, and you need an infinite creator to start space and time. A big bang has to have a great banger.
Yeah.
Big bang, big banger. When somebody closes that door, there's going to be a big bang. Somebody opened it, and it's going to close.
Yeah.
So somebody had to open it. Right? So I do not believe that complexity just came from nothing. Remember? So if you're a magician and I'm a magician, we both come and pull off a magic trick. Well, at least I'm here pulling the bunny out of the hat. You have nobody pulling the bunny out of the hat. The bunny is just coming out of the hat.
Yeah, I would say after a long enough time, the bunny would come out of the hat. Because if you have many, many scenarios where, say, I mean, we know just how many planets there are in the universe. And most of them are dead and don't have life. Most of them are completely barren. And to look at just this one planet and say, look at us, we're so lucky, what are the odds of this happening?
Yeah.
Well, it didn't happen. many, many billions and trillions of times before it did happen. So I would argue that if you do wait a long enough time, funky things do happen. You know, atoms do squish together and create chemicals that are more complex, and they do that over and over until things get even more and more complex, and then you start having water, and then you have basic life, and you have complex life. I think that with over a long enough time span, that stuff does naturally occur without a creator kind of driving it forward.
You as an atheist believe non-existence produced existence. That's a miracle. Non-existence does not produce existence. The problem is, if you're an atheist, you don't have a miracle worker. If you're an atheist, you believe chaos produced order. That's a miracle. But the problem is, if you're an atheist, you have no miracle worker. If you're an atheist, you believe non-life produced life. The problem is, if you're an atheist, you don't have a miracle worker to pull off that miracle of non-life producing life. If you're an atheist, you believe non-reason produced reason. That's a miracle. But if you're an atheist, you don't have a miracle worker. If you're an atheist, you believe meaning comes from matter. That's a miracle. But you don't have a miracle worker. If you're an atheist, you believe that matter produces morality. That's a stinking miracle. But you don't have a miracle worker. If I have a worldview that is incapable of explaining the basic fundamental building blocks of my life, I better reject my worldview. My worldview, my view of reality, better conform to my experience of reality. Otherwise, I'm in deep, deep doo-doo. Because I'm believing something that does not conform to reality.
Matter came from nothing, but nothing came from nothing millions and millions and millions of times before matter came from nothing. And matter led to something more complex just once, just a few times, but matter led to just that same matter thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And that's why we have all these dead, lifeless planets, millions and billions and trillions of them, and we have only one Earth that has complex life on it. Because countless times we saw that failure. So to call ourselves a miracle isn't necessarily the case if there has been these millions and billions, super large numbers, amounts of failure in order for us to exist in the way that we do now, in order for rational beings to exist.
If I'm dealing in poker, and if I'm dealing, and in 4 games in a row, I deal myself all aces. If the other players around the table say, hey, Cliff, you're cheating. And I say, no, I haven't cheated. I just dealt myself all aces 4 times in a row. And you've got to realize that if there are an infinite number of universes, we just happen to live in a universe where I deal myself all aces 4 times in a row. My fellow poker players are not going to say, oh, wow, Cliff, that's really impressive. My poker players are going to say, you're an idiot, Cliff. We know very, very well that the idea that there are an infinite number of universes, and we just so happen by accident to live in a universe where it so happens that when you're dealing cards to yourself, it's all aces in 4 games in a row. It's far more likely that you're cheating, Cliff.
But I guess the best way of describing it is there were worlds where we didn't exist. It's just that we didn't exist to say, oh, look, this is one of those many, many examples where we don't exist. So it makes sense that we're going to live in what seems like a miracle, because the only time that we could ever live and look back on that and say, oh, that's a miracle, is the one time that it actually happened. If things didn't come together to perfectly create rational life, there were no rational beings to say, hey, look, things didn't perfectly come together to create rational life. This is just one of those many, many times.
If there are 10 expert marksmen standing where he is, I'm here, and they all fire at me, and they all miss, there obviously was a plot. There obviously was a conspiracy. These 10 marksmen decided, we're going to miss Cliff. And for me to say, well, the reason I'm here is because I'm here, that doesn't cut it, sir. So for me to say, the only thing that comes from nothing is nothing. You never get something coming from nothing, except it happened this time. Sir, Julie Andrews, that great thinker in Mary Poppins, puts it beautifully when she sings, nothing comes from nothing. Nothing ever could. You can't get something from nothing. If you got nothing, you're not going to get something out of it. Now, earlier you mentioned miracles. A miracle is not a denial of scientific laws. A miracle is a statement that goes along the following. You and I are standing under an apple tree. 100 times out of 100, if that apple disengages from that branch, it's going to hit the ground, right? Gravity will pull it to the ground. Unless you and I reach out and grab the falling apple, then it is not going to hit the ground, is it? That is not a denial of the law of gravity. Instead, that is an introduction into the equation of a hand. The hand catches the apple. The law of gravity does not suck the apple to the ground. The apple is in my hand. A miracle is the introduction of a hand. A miracle is not, oh, the laws of science are stupid. Oh, we're just going to change the law of gravity. That's not what a miracle is. A miracle is a statement. There's a supernatural God who intervenes in a situation. For instance, I believe that Mary was a virgin. That does not mean that for 9 months God performed miracles in Mary's womb. No, there was an initial miracle. A woman conceived without having sex with a man. But then there were 9 months of baby Jesus growing in that woman's womb, totally naturally, according to all the laws of nature. So this is not a denial of the laws of nature, but it is a statement that there's a supernatural God who intervenes and performs a miracle.